I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this session, which is called Link in the Chain, Collaborative Adaptation in Humanitarian Logistics and the Supply Chain. This is a joint session being run by as part of the ALNAP meeting and the Global Logistics Cluster meeting, and it's a real pleasure to be able to join these two learning events. The ALNAP meeting this year, as you probably know, is looking at learning emerging from disruption. We know that disruption creates fertile ground for learning as organizations and individuals adapt their approaches to the changes that are happening around them. We also know experience suggests that change in the humanitarian system, particularly transformational change, may have more to do with the influence of external forces than planned internal shifts. In this discussion, we will be considering the area of logistics. In the initial months of the pandemic, the suspension of international travel, introduction of restrictions on movement of people and goods, and maritime traffic had a massive impact on humanitarian supply chains. Border and port closures, lower stock of essential items, and delivery delays in particular magnified these disruptions. Organizations needed to come up with innovative approaches at record pace to move cargo and personnel to where they were needed. The disruption that the pandemic caused to the way that organizations were managing logistics has led to a wealth of rapid adaptation and learning. It's provided a test case for different approaches. So this morning, we'll be asking our colleagues on the panel to consider what has been the learning that has emerged from these experiences and what do they feel are the implications for the sector. Will these changes lead to revolutionary changes that will have a significant impact on the way that logistics is managed in the future? Will it just be slow, incremental change that will be picked up over time? Or is this just a blip and we will be expecting to change back to the pre-2020 status quo? There will certainly be an absolute wealth of learning in this session, I have no doubt. And with that, I'm delighted to hand over to Anya, who will be leading the session.
Thank you very much, Juliet, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining bright and early if you're watching in Europe, but elsewhere, good morning anyway, or good afternoon. My name is Anya Sitaram. I'm a former ITN Health and Science correspondent and BBC World News anchor. And since leaving news, I've been making a lot of documentaries about environment, health, and international development. And as part of that, have worked with a lot of humanitarian agencies, NGOs and charities, partly to get access into a particular country. Today we have a very large and diverse panel, and that actually reflects the nature of the logistics cluster, with partners coming together to collaborate on joint solutions to shared challenges in humanitarian logistics. And just to tell you a little bit about that cluster approach, it was adopted to improve efficiency in the humanitarian response. And the logistics cluster has a community of partners which seeks to collaborate both in country and at a global level. And this panel today actually gives you a bit of a flavour of a logistics cluster meeting. You will see with all the different diverse experiences and opinions. And they're going to be sharing their views on how the pandemic impacted humanitarian logistics and whether any learning from the experience will actually have a lasting effect. And that is a question I'll be posing to them all during the panel discussion. We're going to have a poll now, and I'm going to read it aloud. You can probably see it, but for the translators, I'm going to read it aloud. So, which of the following aspects of humanitarian logistics do you think have been most significantly impacted by the pandemic, both negatively and positively? You can choose up to 3: in-country transportation and logistics, international procurement, availability of goods from abroad, field-level logistics coordination mechanisms, supply chain information sharing, and availability of locally produced materials. So let's just see what you have said. So at the moment, it's goods delivered, delivery lead times, both locally and abroad, international procurement. Just behind that, 36%. availability of locally produced materials. So yes, there seems to be problems you've experienced locally and on the international supply chain. So we've all experienced quite a bit of disruption. Okay, I'm going to introduce the panel to you, and they're all going to tell you a little bit about themselves. So we'll go around the room. So first of all, Fiona Lithgow, Logistics Cluster Coordinator, South Sudan, welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone there. I'm the Log Cluster and Preparedness Coordinator here in South Sudan. South Sudan's a large-scale emergency. We're very operational as a cluster, and also we're the lead focal point for the COVID response for the national program and internally for WFP staffing. So this is what I'm basically doing here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And next to Nikola Jovanovic, who's the Global Advisor, Global Humanitarian Services and Supply Chain Management of the IFRC. Nikola.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nikola Jovanovic, and I work as a Global Advisor in Global Humanitarian Services and Supply Chain Unit here in Geneva. Presently on these tasks, but previously I was deployed in practically most of our regional offices, starting from Africa, and I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, also Southeastern Asia. So practically, when I arrived to Geneva, they called me and they said, listen, we need somebody to keep business running while everybody else is doing COVID. So I came here not to deal with COVID, but unfortunately, as many of the colleagues on the panel and in the audience end up doing only COVID. So I'm very happy to be here. Pleasure to have opportunity to share my experiences with you. I'm really looking forward for the following hour or so to discuss about what happened to us as a humanitarian community in the last year and a half or 2 years. Thank you, Anya.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing your insights. And then we have Ayla Bajwa, who's the Head of Group Sustainability and Impact at DP World. Ayla, welcome.
Thank you. So I am the Head of Global Sustainability Impact for DP World. So we're a very large scale logistics solution provider. Historically, we were a ports and terminal operator and have always been very keen to leverage our business strengths to support the humanitarian sector. And so I look forward to sort of diving into conversations around that.
And where are you, Ayla?
I'm based in Dubai.
Right.
And
okay.
if anyone is visiting Expo Dubai in the next few months, please do come visit our DP World Pavilion.
Excellent, thank you. And then we also have Sean Rafter, who's the Managing Director of Help Logistics. Welcome, Sean.
Good morning, Anya. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Sean Rafter. I'm working at the Kuna Foundation. My earlier career was as an engineer, both in automotive and telecoms industry before spending about a decade in the humanitarian sector. Since leaving the operational field of humanitarian sector, I work in the Kuna Foundation, and we're specifically supporting supply chain and logistics knowledge transfer through various collaborations with the private sector and academia to support humanitarian relief. So I'm very happy to be part of the panel today and look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Anya.
Thank you very much, Sean. And then we have Jean-Baptiste Lamarche, who is the Directeur Logistique et Système d'Information, ACF France. Jean-Baptiste?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. So yes, Jean-Baptiste Lamarche, I'm the Logistic Director of ACF. And I'm also a member of the Réseau Logistique Humanitaire, the RLH, which has just created a cooperative that is dedicated to facilitate pooling of resources, joint procurement. And so I'm very pleased to be a part of the panel today and to discuss about how Logistic did accompany this crisis. Thank you.
And we have Paul Molinaro, who's the Chief Operations Support and Logistics from the World Health Organization. Paul, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Pleased to be here. with my subtle background image. Sorry, I was caught a little bit off time with the timing of this. I don't particularly want you to see what's behind me. No, pleased to be with you. I'm the head of the Operation Support Logistics Unit for the Health Emergencies Program of WHO. For COVID, was co-chairing the UN COVID supply chain system, and within WHO, really focusing on acquisition and deployment of critical supplies in the diagnostics, PPE, and biomedical pillars. Very nice to be here.
A very vital role there. Thank you very much, Paul. And we may or may not be joined by Silva Alkebeh, who's the Chief Supply Logistics from UNHCR. She's actually in Tigray at the moment, and as you know, there's a lot of conflict there, so it just depends on the situation there. Okay, so thank you very much for the introductions. We're now going to start with a round of questions for the speakers. There was tremendous concern about the impact of COVID-19 on many countries, but particularly on those countries already facing challenges such as South Sudan. So what do you think were the main impacts on the logistics operations in South Sudan?
Thanks very much. First of all, a very brief background. I'm going to talk about in-country logistics, not on the incoming items for all our partners, and also not just going to discuss PPE, because that was obviously an issue in itself. Now, I've had a lot of chats with a certain amount of people doing masters around the world, and they sort of look me up and sort of want to have a chat on COVID-19 and the impact. And pretty much the impact is not really what people expect. Did we see a delay in incoming goods? Well, not really, because you have to remember we have a lot of large scale, it's been a large scale emergency here for about 7 years. The pipelines controlled by largely the UN agencies are relatively robust to be able to handle any sort of disruptions. It's not just in time procurement. There are other issues that delay that. We did see some delays in some border crossings because a lot of the cargo comes in from the south through Uganda. That was minor because unfortunately it is South Sudan, and delays at borders and all that are something we work with quite often, and we're talking about a few days. Now, did we see a gap in the operations? Did we see the cluster here being a big operational cluster having nothing to do because there was no cargo here? No, we didn't see that at all. Did it see any visible impacts? Not really on the delivery of items to our beneficiaries. What we did see, however, across the board, certainly with WFP, our partners, INGOs, our national partners, the issues were with staff. People were, obviously at the start, travel was difficult. People were trapped in the country for long periods of times without having any idea of A, when they could get out, B, where they could go. Their families are remote. And we're also talking about international staff here who, a lot of them have their families, especially in Uganda. So it was more of the issues on the staff and their not knowing when they could move. When can I see my family again? Can I cross the border? And the likes there. So there was also people, our partners, and certainly WP was one, in the field for months on end, in deep field we're talking about, just to maintain operations because they couldn't come back to Juba. I mean, some of the biggest impacts we had, to be honest, at the staff were imposed initially by the government, by the Ministry of Health, where we had to do PCR tests to move out of Juba up into the country, or quarantine, no, sorry, not PCR, but quarantine for 14 days. So that created a huge, that initially created a delay. Mitigating factors were organizations moved people up to sort of hubs across the country to avoid this 14 days quarantine, and hence they were there for 6 months, things like that. So it was more of the staff issues. You know, people get tired, people get sick, It was also difficult moving people around, getting people back into Juba in the case of medivacs, and that creates in the mindset a whole lot of uncertainty. So this is what pretty much what people, the major effects were. There was basically a lot of tired people around. I myself was in South Sudan for 9 months before I could get out. So, and there's people here longer, and also people here not much shorter than that. So the major issues we saw were related to staffing.
So what was the, sorry, just to interrupt, yes. that is interesting. You're saying it's staffing. So obviously a psychological impact there with people feeling trapped, but
yes,
practically, what did it mean? I mean, you say you were all right for in-country supplies.
Basically, we carried on as business as usual. Yeah, it was business as usual. We didn't see ourselves. We didn't see any gaps, any reduction of requirements. All of these, having people out in the field, were mitigating factors to keep the response running. It's large scale. It's across the country. It's up and down all the time. So the factors were the cargo, the supply chain was sufficient in country. There was sufficient supplies coming in across the border, even though there were some delays due to obviously testing and concerns of truck drivers across the continent, bringing in COVID. So, but in general, talking about the in-country response in South Sudan on COVID, did we see a gap or a reduction in the distribution of supplies for our beneficiaries? No, not really.
Okay, thank you very much.
As what as people thought.
Thank you, Fiona. We'll come back to you later on. Okay, so I'd like to move on to Nico now from the IFRC. So, do you have similar observations to Fiona? How did the pandemic impact the logistics from where you're looking?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to look at it from international perspective because sitting in Geneva, you know, we practically did overview, and we had an overview of all 5 regions that we are working in. If I want to summarize everything in just one sentence, I would easily say we were not ready. Us, as I believe many of other colleagues, I believe as a global world, we were not ready. We were not ready in a point that we thought that our backup plan for everything that can happen and everything that is happening sits in our good preparedness and preposition stocks. We're coming to the point where we have a global disruption, not just of supply chain and deliveries. We have a global supply chain of production, of the materials that we never thought as a world that we will need in the quantities that they were needed. Something similar happened in 2014 when we had the big operation in Ebola in Western Africa, where we have a global lack of body bags. So something, but like 100 times bigger, happened at the moment. So the big question, which is coming after this one, and if we're speaking, is it a revolution, evolution, or status quo? I think that if you're speaking about localization, this is the best time. If you're speaking about better preparedness, this is the best time. If you're speaking about living the new now and new reality, the supply chains needs to follow the new trends, if there's a trend at all. What we are facing at the moment is a raise of global demand of 39%. That means no Lego bricks in the shops. That means no oxygen concentrators and compressors on time. That means that the biggest ports in the United States are working 24/7 around the clock. That means that my windows for my house that I'm refurbishing is late 2.5 months. So, you know, it's easy to speak with this audience because more or less we are all related to the supply chain, so we understand each other, but it's very hard to explain to our colleagues from the operation why the certain things are not functioning they got used to. So a revolution more than ever, in meaning of, as I said, maybe move from global to local as possible, which is part of agenda for renewal of IFRC for 2030 and part of the Great Bargain, and thinking differently what to do to prevent what we actually did in the beginning of 2020 and all around 2021, because for me, this still looks like one big market, of stocks exchange where everybody is buying randomly and everybody is trying to get their space in the cargo flight. We're going back to 90s where we were more competition than the partners, and this is what scares me.
That is interesting. Just very follow up very briefly to what you said. I mean, obviously all global supply chains are affected now, and as you say, the ordinary consumer is worried about what they're going to get for Christmas. I'm just interested in what it actually means right now for humanitarian supply chains.
Moving to more localized stocks, working on a better preposition strategies, getting closer to the last mile, and understanding that, as I said, the traditional non-food items that we used to use, those shelter toolkits, kitchen sets and tents, are not good enough anymore to support the operation, because we need to understand that we're not operating in the earthquakes anymore, we're not operating in the floods anymore, we're operating in floods, earthquakes, droughts, volcano eruptions in the era of COVID. And everything that sits with that sentence practically is telling us that we have to be smart and move forward and move practically from traditional ways of doing things to more localized things, to better demand planning, and understand that new items needs to be introduced for our preposition stocks, mostly PPEs and oxygen concentrators and support. I mean, present lead time for produce of one oxygen plant is 4 to 6 weeks. Put it in the context that 3 major airports in China are still closed, and that the price of cargo flight go up to 1 million per flight, is practically 3 figures and 3 proofs why I'm saying what I'm saying.
That's very difficult indeed. We have a question here in the chat from Danny from UNFPA, who is saying, has there been any meta-analysis around the impact of national lockdowns in humanitarian affected countries on the physical movement of goods or at national levels?
It's happening as we speak, at least in IFRC. Yeah, meta-analysis is ongoing, and it is a part of a revision of the global preposition strategy, which is a part of revision of global strategy of IFRC that is happening, as I said, as we speak on this one. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much, Nico. Let's move on to our next speaker then. I'd like to ask Sean from Help Logistics. So you're involved in operational research. I just wondered where you saw the role of that during the pandemic.
Thanks, Anya. Yeah, I think first maybe to understand operational research, what it really is. I mean, what we're looking at is analytical methods of problem solving to support management decisions. And I think on that basis, we've seen how important it is to collaborate outside of the traditional humanitarian sector. And that's something that we at the Foundation are very much supporting, is bringing academia closer, bringing private sector closer to humanitarian response to assist. And of course, in a global pandemic, every resource available contributes to finding solutions. And because the humanitarian situation was so complex, with many more stakeholders, with different incentives, research can be a real valuable contribution. And I think the idea that research is often long-term and doesn't have short-term value is also being debunked and dismissed a little bit. We heard from Professor Luc van Wassenhof yesterday that as long as we understand the two modalities of the different sectors, it's very much possible to bring research to bear on current problems. Understanding what's happening through various methods to understand the behavior in the system, what the needs are, to get opinions, to find a collective understanding of a situation is really valuable for decision making. It also helps to deliver different perspectives. We often in humanitarian become very kind of organizational or systematic, entrenched in the way we work. And it's great to have those other perspectives to challenge the way we're operating. And it also provides the tools to which to understand very complex systems at work. I'm an engineer and logistician by background, so I'm not an academic, so I feel I can speak to 5 years of collaborating with universities and really understanding that they are now an active stakeholder in humanitarian response. I've seen a huge development in not just traditional academic work, but really trying to understand the context which we operate in. They're very clued in, very understanding, and very supportive of providing valuable insights during response. So I think that's been a big change, is to see the acceleration in their contribution and willingness to support response. And I think it's also to bear in mind that these research as part of universities, they're also the development of the next generation of talent. The next generation of humanitarian responders will come through academia, and it's very important that they are understanding and getting involved now in research and work that will contribute to their understanding and support for future emergencies.
So would that help in sort of long-term planning?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, if we take a long range, there is a shortage of talent in the humanitarian. We need to encourage more people to get involved. It's there. What I've seen in speaking with at universities during the pandemic and before is a growing interest in social and humanitarian causes. I see that in the private sector as well. Retention of staff is very much now focused on providing the next generation of talent with access to support social, community, and humanitarian causes. They're not driven as much in the past by benefits, financial benefits, but more about causes. And I think that's really important to understand.
Thank you very much, Sean. Fiona, did you want to come in there?
I think Sean said it very eloquently, to be honest. So I haven't got any further comments to add. Over.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I thought I saw you raising your hand. Perhaps not. Okay, I'll come round to you again in a minute. Thank you. Jean-Baptiste, welcome. So you are an international NGO, your organization, and you operate in a number of countries, not just those where there's an activated logistics cluster. Did you see any difference in the way humanitarian logistics operations were conducted, and if so, how?
Yes, thank you, Anya. So, of course, for us, when the logistic cluster is activated, we can see that the coordination is more structured, and this is contributing to the logistic performance and efficiency. But what we know also is that the logistic cluster benefits from a very strong community spirit, and that even when the log cluster is not present, there are plenty of logistic connections, networks, and collaboration amongst organizations. And I think this is really part of our DNA to collaborate. So during the crisis, I think what has been highlighted or reinforced is that logisticians are seen as solution providers, especially when no one is finding a solution anymore. We received many requests to find solution. I won't come back to what Nico and Nicolas and Fiona said, but we had to maintain the ongoing pipelines. We have to find and procure PPE, and for most of us, we never purchased that. And on top of that, we had the international staff movement to find a solution for. And that's also usually not under logistics. And so in this chaotic and uncertain context, well, the reflex, the main action that we take is that we call our network, we call our friends. And so logistics were at the heart of the response, and their connection did support the operation. So with the log cluster, probably better, but it's also working without the log cluster.
So do you think it worked? I mean, did you manage to get your supplies through, or did you have a huge amount of disruption?
Well, we've been disrupted as everyone, and it was extremely intense. I think logisticians were really under pressure to find solutions and face a challenge of lead time, price inflation, and all of this in a very big emotional context, with people locked everywhere. So we had to find a kind of agile and quick solution in a kind of survival logic. So what we could learn is that first, well, to my experience at least, existing networks with experience to work together, such as the RLH, did quickly gather and organize themselves, consolidate the needs and find collective solutions. And this is what we promote through the paper that is called Strengths in Numbers. And this is how the EU hub came up, complementing the WFP and WHO air bridge. So that's the first solution. Existing network with experience to work together, facilitate a bit the work. Second, really what we noticed is that there were not one-size-fits-all solutions. Each country, each situation was really specific. And so we could see that there were ad hoc gathering of actors with the same specific problems to find the best solution together. And so at the global level, this leads to have a panel of different options available, and each organization, according to its problem to solve, could choose and pick. So the conclusion is that the added value for this pandemic and global crisis is that there are really added value created by the complementarity of different solutions.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. I'd like to bring in Ayla now. Ayla, you've got a private sector perspective from DP World. I'd be interested to know, obviously, the private sector works in supply chains and locally it's a big presence, but how can the CSR activities, particularly with respect to information and analysis, help the humanitarian logistics people?
Yeah, so earlier I introduced myself as head of global sustainability for DP World, but today what I'm really doing is representing the LET, so the logistics emergency team that we're a part of, which is 4 companies that have come together, Agility, 4 largest companies within the logistics industry. So UPS, Maersk, Agility, and DP World. And we were founded, we were WEF initiated, World Economic Forum initiated in 2005. We have been in existence for 15 years, very much under the guidance of the World Food Program. So the World Food Program, the United Nations World Food Program provides sort of the support it needs from the private sector in situations of emergency response. And so actually, I would refrain from using the word corporate social responsibility and sort of actually position it as a shared value approach. So really taking stock of where we bring value as businesses and then working together for collated solutions. So really seeing where do we have presence and where can we take action. And so what's been interesting in the COVID scenario is really that need for digital transformation. So we were very boots on the ground for the last 15 years, and just as our businesses have evolved digitally, so has our response and our support evolved digitally. And so there is this focus and I believe one of my colleagues mentioned it earlier, the need for preparedness. So, right, we need to prepare. And so what we have as as a consortium of companies, large companies, is information. And so how do we transmit this information to the larger humanitarian community? So actually LET has introduced a dashboard called Eduardo, a digital dashboard that gives access to humanitarian logisticians to information related to air freight, so cargo capacity as far as air is concerned, and so we essentially want to do more of this. How do we evolve these technology tools and these dashboards for the larger community to gain access to? And that information can come from our businesses, but that information can also come from larger integrations. And so this is very much the direction we see ourselves moving towards. It probably has catapulted during COVID. So we were always on this path towards digitalization. But with COVID, there's really been this internal business strategy conversation in all our companies individually, the need for speed towards digital transformation. And how can we leverage the efforts and investments we're making towards technologies and giving humanitarian organizations access to that, but of course also providing the traditional infrastructure and access that we have as businesses. So as a case in point of a more traditional model is a partnership actually DP World entered into with UNICEF during this time, whereby we have provided access, pro bono access to our warehouses and to our ports, because we are based in Dubai, so it is a strategic transit city, and offered it as a place to store PPE, etc. And so and so what's interesting is that is historically always been the first offer, our first value proposition, but now we are looking at, okay, how can we leverage the technologies we're using for your larger purposes? So again, I think even bilaterally, those conversations are happening. And so it's been a two-pronged approach through the LET. There has been this collective solution that has been created. So Eduardo, we have also conducted something called capacity assessments, so logistic capacity assessments, to understand primarily in 6 cities, strategic 6 cities, to understand what information is on the ground, what information can we make available from a procurement perspective to the larger humanitarian community. And so there's been those collective solutions, but then there's been these bilateral. So we've been working together for 15 years. So the camaraderie between our organizations is strong. And so there's this desire and there's been consistency, right? So if you exist for 15 years, you have consistently been addressing the same solution, the same crises in different forms for a very long time. And so now so there were a lot of bilateral solutions that came out of this time. So I've mentioned the DP World one. Agility launched a microsite specific to COVID response. So everyone also worked bilaterally in their own ways and kept each other informed, so that we have a repository of best practices that we can share with the larger community. And so there's this evolution from immediate response to preparedness to now thought leadership. So how do we collect this information and share it in a data-driven way, in a technological way, but also a thought-provoking way? So that I would say is sort of our stance in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Ayla, for that very interesting perspective, and the fact that you're talking really about solutions. And so I want to go to Paul Molinaro from the World Health Organization next. And you were at the heart of the health supply chain, quite unprecedented task for anyone. I'd be interested to hear what your main takeaway from this experience was, but also the sort of transformation opportunities or solutions that you had to come up with.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think, I mean, I agree with all the other colleagues who've spoken. I mean, it's quite a fascinating space. I mean, I'd have to say, agree with Nikola. We were completely unprepared for just the scale. I don't think any of us in living memory has actually had to address pandemic. I mean, in its fullest sense. So we're really looking at a disruptive event on a par with, you know, with a world war, at least a public health event on a par with the influenza in 1917-18. So it's very hard to imagine scale. You can scenario plan, but until you're actually in it, it's very difficult to comprehend. Having said that, there were some things that worked. So the GISRIS lab network established for pandemic influenza preparedness worked. We got hold of the genetic sequence, novel virus. It got shared across the collaborating centers. Within a week or two, there was a viable test. And a week after that, those essays were on planes heading out. So you'd say, well, from having something that didn't exist to a viable test in 30 days, it's a remarkable feat. The same thing you can say with vaccine research and development. I mean, it's an incredibly short span of time that we now have numerous vaccine options that are emergency use listed and are, you know, some of them on the way to being properly licensed. It's also a remarkable feat. I mean, obviously the flip side of that, and certainly for me, this was a learning experience, the fact that had a high disease burden in high income countries. So in a sense, it's not the normal sort of humanitarian model with funding going from one direction. You now compete with the very countries who are traditionally your donors for the same product. And there you get a sense of certainly a much more understanding and in your face sense of what is inequity, certainly around the inequity of access. So although we're very successful in developing solutions with a lot of financial muscle, of course, from high income countries with high disease burden, when it came to the deployment, there's obviously lessons and look that we're going to need to take a look at. The impact of travel and trade restrictions, very profound. You can scenario plan, but when you have travel restrictions on populations between one country, 3 countries, 4 countries, 5 countries, at some point the airlines just give up and say, we're not going to run these routes anymore. The impact of that is profound. Export restrictions, requisitioning the means of production. It has knock-on effects that we can't comprehend. The world is so interlocked and intertwined. The effects of globalization over the last sort of 30, 40 years and the supply chains that power that are so codependent on each other that the shocks and unintended shocks of either a policy decision or of another singular event will continue to be felt. And Nikola is right. Right now, we're paying higher price for cargo, both in shipping and in aviation, than we did this time last year. It's tripled than it was this time last year. And we're still feeling those effects. I think untangling all of that is going to be difficult. It's certainly going to require a rethink around centralized means of production, around the equity of access, and around how I think the private sector is going to configure their supply chains in the future. I totally agree with Fiona. In some of these countries at which we operate, we're quite resilient. Some of these countries are not net beneficiaries of the international trading system. And we've built stock gaps. So we've managed to have workarounds in Yemen for years, South Sudan for years. So the impact there, we use charters. We have a just in case mentality. We are resilient. We are collaborative. We are cooperative. We work together as logisticians. So I would agree with her. Maybe the impact in some of these places is not as much as, say, the impact in Lombardy, the impact in Singapore. Again, you have some of these high income, heavily industrialized economies that have high disease burden, and their coping mechanisms, their resilience are far different. And the impact of this event on them, on their societies, is also far different. So where it goes, we have to look and see. But it's to say that there has been a lot of things that we can do to mitigate an event like this, that we've never had this kind of capacity before. So it's not all doom and gloom, but certainly there's some areas where we need a radical rethink.
Thank you, absolutely fascinating. Fiona, I'll just go back to you, because obviously the resilience of your South Sudan, it was highlighted there, the fact that you didn't feel the same local impacts. But I'm just interested in some of the other points as well that were raised about transformation and digital transformation. I mean, how would digital transformation work in South Sudan? Is it even something that you would think about?
Look, yes, it is, but we have large-scale restrictions here. I mean, we are doing the question initially, the online learning and what we're doing. Obviously, COVID's impacted a whole change of how we coordinate, how we discuss things and the likes there worldwide. So while that's been fine, in terms of the digital transformation related to like online learning, we hit some barriers there, because a lot of the country here in South Sudan doesn't have any internet or phone signals. So we've had to, what we're doing is we've adapted to that and doing deep field coordination trainings face to face, obviously with mitigation measures ourselves, because that's a reality. Whereas other countries will have a large scale revolution and the likes here, we are still very much governed by the basics of electricity and lack of signals. So, which is only really relevant and sustainable in the largest cities here. And even then it can be a bit up and down. So yes, it's the way forward. Absolutely. We've gone as we're keeping going down that track, but some countries face the basic infrastructure issues, and we're certainly one of them. Over. Thank you.
Jean-Baptiste, what did the pandemic tell you about resilience? Are there any lessons to be learned? Did you find certain countries were more resilient than others?
Well, in terms of resilience, I think, as I said before, and as was also reported by the others, the more we work together, the more we are we put that in our daily routines. The more on the day where there is major disruptions, we are de facto more resilient, because we can count on each other, find collective solutions, and progress. I think that's one of the major learning from this crisis. Also, and that contribute to the preparedness, to share activities and to work together, make us better prepared to look for solutions. So that's type of resilience. The other point is that at ACF level, what we really scale up is the reduction of international preposition stock, but an increase of local preparedness stock, just to mitigate the risk of having international connections that are blocked and so on. And we also reduce quite a lot the lead time by having the goods ready at country level. And this is especially for ACF on the medical supply chain, the drugs supply chain, where the delay or the lead time to supply is usually around 6 months. And so to increase the local stock is really bringing a lot of added value and increasing the resilience to shock.
Thank you very much. Just a question that's come in the chat, which I'd like to ask Nico. With all the learnings, preparedness and localizing supply chain, pooling of resources, what will the new way of working look like for the humanitarian logistics field? Nico, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So as I said earlier, I see the more local action needed now more than ever. Moving from globalization and centralizing system of production and transport, building a massive and heavy framework agreements. It's not a modality that will work in the future. Second thing that I think is going to be very important is to hire, train, and produce more medical logisticians. Maybe logisticians who does have better understanding of medical supply chains, and they understand. I mean, not them. We need to understand fragility of. I mean, every supply chain is fragile. Independently, but I have a feeling that this teaches us that we never had enough focus on this area of supply chain management. I'm not talking about the cold chains. Cold chains are something that is very much we are very much familiar with, but focusing more on different kind of medical item, medical equipment, storage, producement, innovations in a field, an area of in this field, as Paul rightly said, we did have some amazing achievements as a global world, getting a vaccine in a year or less, getting a first test in a month. So this is somewhere where supply chains needs to get. This is the way we need to look at more. And of course, one of the initiatives that WHO and HRD are having at the moment, this Initiate Square project, is a very good start and a very good timing to look at the innovations. And as I said, of course, localization and training and producing and bringing on more medical logistician people from the field. There's just one thing I would like to say when it comes to digitalization, because, this is a new trend. And I think that digitalization helped this world to be alive, and that we are in a position that we are getting back to normal or to situation 2019. We were able to sit home and work. My team and me, we in first month, we implemented $15.5 million, Swiss francs, producing PPEs, sitting in our pajamas, independently, not seeing each other for 3 months.
I hope you weren't sitting in your pajamas there, but anyway.
Not anymore, unfortunately. They're pushing us to go back. So, no, the idea here and behind this, what I'm saying is that this is the difference why we managed to stop the first wave of COVID compared to 100 years ago, for example, the Spanish flu, whatever. We had food, we had water, we had electricity. If I want to be a devil advocate, I would just ask a question, which is more philosophical, but directly linked to this one. What will happen if the next COVID is not a medical or it's not a health issue spread around the world? What if it's a massive cyber attack? And all of digitalization, all of fancy ERP platforms, and everything disappeared. So this is the plan B that we need to think about. How much time, it's not directly linked to supply chain, but indirectly it is, how much time, energy, and resources we are giving to cybersecurity. Because if that stops...
Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to go around the room because we've only got 3 minutes left. And I just want to some closing thoughts. I'm going to put one question to you, so please be very brief in your answers. We've heard there about not being prepared, about the massive learning that's taken place. So when this is all over, because we're still feeling the aftershocks, is it going to be a revolution, evolution, or status quo? Paul Molinaro, would you like to begin with your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first, it's not over. I think we're still in the thick of it. I'd say revolution, and unfortunately, revolution. I've been on the peripheries and involved in too many of them. They're messy. There's a lot of collateral damage. They never go the direction you think they're going to go. The outcome is never, very rarely, the outcome the people or the root cause of the revolution was. So it's certainly uncertainty. You add the perfect storm. I mean, I think Nikola's point with potential cyber, I think there's a reckoning on the way we do things. I think there's a reckoning coming on the way we do certainly supply chain, and the way production has moved, almost a race to the bottom. This effort to drive out cost from everything that we do. If you look at the people, the seafarers on the ships, 18 months, they've been treated abominably. They can't leave the vessel. They can't get vaccinated. Truck drivers are just jacking it in. They're fed up. They're being monitored everything they do, every stop they make, every time they go close to the speed limit. So I think there's a reckoning, and amongst all of this, there has to be a reckoning as the rising tide of climate change starts to lap at our feet. So I think it's revolution, and it's maybe not going to be pleasant.
Thank you very much. So go around the room even more, and please could you be very brief, just one word and one sentence. Ayla, which would you go for?
Somewhere in the middle, so fast-paced evolution. So the need for change, the need for speed, but and to reiterate, but not necessarily a complete overturn of the status quo.
Okay, so perhaps evolution then. Okay, Sean, Rafter, revolution, evolution, or status quo?
I'm actually hoping for revolution, because I agree with Paul and Nikola. I think things need to change, but I suspect it will be an accelerated evolution for some. And just like cogs on a wheel, some will turn faster and move with the times, and maybe some will fall off. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. I mean, we're out of time, so just one word, please.
I think I agree with what has been said. It feels like a revolution, but I wonder if that it is not only an evolution, having in mind the climate change challenges that are coming to us, and that feels like would be a greater revolution. Okay, thank you. Fiona?
A slow evolution, unfortunately. Human nature means that we quickly forget major shocks, and there's a lot of impacts in the world that we can't control. So unfortunately, I think it's going to be a slow evolution. Over.
Thank you. Nico, you said at the beginning, just give me the one word. Have you changed your mind at all?
Unpleasant revolution.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much to our panel. Thank you very much to our audience. I mean, that was such an interesting discussion, and hats off to you for the work you've been doing. So thank you very much, everybody.